Hello everyone and welcome back to Beatly Tones Beatles channel. Thanks for joining me for this video. Hope you're all doing okay. On this channel we try and do different sorts of stuff, like some news stories, some reviews of new stuff, reviews of old stuff, and some sort of stories of that happened at the time. And today being the 8th of December, the 41st anniversary of John's death, I thought I would do a video just telling my story of that day. I'd like to hear your stories as well if you were around then, things that you remember about that day, so put them down in the comments below. Before I get started on it, just all the usual things. If you like the stuff that we're doing here, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and hit the notification button. That'd be absolutely great. I think to get the full impact of what happened in 1980, you need to sort of go back to the autumn when it was first announced that that John was back in the studio making a new album. This was like the best news that I'd ever heard, because as I discovered the Beatles in 1976, so by that time John had already sort of retired from public life and from his professional life. So the fact that he was back in the studio making a new album meant that when this new album came out, it was the first time I was actually going to be able to buy a John Lennon album live, if you like, or as it came out. So that was quite an important thing. The album was preceded by the release of Just Like Starting Over, and when it came out, obviously I bought it. John's voice sounded as good as ever, and I played it to death while I waited patiently for the album to come out. When the album finally arrived in November, to be honest, when I got it home and played it, I was a little bit disappointed to find that, there was 14 tracks on the album and 7 of them were by Yoko and 7 by John, so they kind of shared the tracks vocally. I'd waited 4 years for this album to come, and 7 new John Lennon songs was not a great return for my patience, I suppose. However, once I'd listened to it a few times, I really got into the Yoko songs on this, and it was really clear that Yoko had learned far more from New Wave than John had, whereas the main sort of rule of punk rock, I suppose, was that you didn't have to have a great voice to be a decent singer. And after all, sort of Yoko was making records like Susie and the Banshees, for example, about 10 years before Susie thought that she'd invented that sound. It might be fair to say that Yoko was the original punk rocker. While John's songs were about embracing sort of middle age and domestic bliss, Yoko's took a much harder stance, sounded bitter and angry and exciting, and were laden with some of John's sort of most vicious guitar playing. Kiss Kiss Kiss, for example, was just like pure sex and ended with Yoko presumably faking an orgasm, which was uncomfortable to listen to, but challenging at the same time. Having said that, though, whilst the sort of the subject matter of John's songs was a little bit more mainstream, it was clear that in songs like I'm Losing You, Watching the Wheels, he'd written a couple of songs there that were probably amongst the best of his entire career. And on Woman, he sounded just like Beatle John, and what can be better than that, I suppose. But it was just generally just great having John back in the news and on the radio and on the TV again. He did lots of promotional stuff for the new album, photo shoot for Rolling Stone, interview with Playboy. He did a 5-hour interview with Andy Peebles from Radio 1, in which he was just in the best mood, and just seemed happier than he'd ever been. And the best news that he gave us was that he was already sort of halfway through making the follow-up album to Double Fantasy, and that would be finished in 1981. and when it was, he was planning to go on the road, and he mentioned about coming to the UK, and hadn't been home since 1971 when he moved to New York. So that was the backdrop to the story, but now down to the sort of the nitty gritty of it. So on the morning of Tuesday, the 9th of December 1980, which is where it was here in the UK, my mum woke me up sort of with a jolt, and this wasn't any different to any other morning. I always relied on her to wake me up, for school. And now I was at work. I was I was like a junior bank clerk, and she was still waking me up. I was 19 at that time, and woke me up and I said, I don't know how to tell you this, but John's been shot. And I'm just like, I'm still coming to, I suppose. And John who? John Lennon, she said. And her words sort of resonated around my ears, for a few seconds as I gradually came to, I suppose, woke up properly. At first, it never really crossed my mind that he might be dead, because people got shot, in America all the time, right? They didn't all die, and if he'd been dead, she would have said John Lennon's dead, wouldn't she? And in my mind, I'm just thinking, well, this is John Lennon, he'll be fine. So I got dressed for work as normal, and still, not really sort of taking it in. Crept down the stairs. As I got halfway down, I could hear the radio in the kitchen playing Imagine. My mum always listened to LBC, which is a London talk radio station. She always listened to that every morning, and they didn't play pop music on it. It was all talk. They didn't play pop music on that station unless there was a really good reason. And I guess it was at that moment that I realised that John had been killed, because there could be no other reason why they would be playing his song on the radio. And I I just sort of slumped down on the stairs, head in hands, and just wept like a baby. And I don't remember another time in my life where I was so not in control of my emotions. I'd lost two grandparents sort of in the late 70s and not shed a tear, yet here I was in bits over a pop star who I'd never met, and who had no idea of my existence. I didn't want to go to work, but my mum insisted that it was unlikely that I would be granted compassionate leave because one of the Beatles had died, and they probably wouldn't view it with the same degree of importance as I did. So begrudgingly, I trudged off to work, got on the tube. It was a bit of a sort of a puffy, red-eyed mess, and I can remember looking around the carriage, and the other passengers were laughing and joking and just chatting with each other without a care in the world, just like it was a normal day. And I can remember feeling like, how dare they? Do they not know what had happened, or did they just not care? Non-reflection, it's possible that they didn't know, because it happened too late at night to make the morning papers. And these were the days sort of before breakfast TV in the UK. So if they hadn't been listening to the radio that morning, then they probably didn't know. And even if they did, I doubt they would have cared as much as I did. When I got to work, people from other offices within the building were making a special journey down to my office to offer commiserations as if it was a member of my family that had died. On any other day, the office that I worked in was usually full of banter and mickey taking and chat about football, between the five of us that worked there. But today was very different. It was all dead quiet and very seemly, and they were all really nice. On the way home from work, I bought sort of both the London evening papers, the Evening Standard and the Evening News, and these papers now were just full of the story, pages and pages of it, outpourings of lament and horrendous photo of John, signing an autograph for Chapman. The tube itself had a very different atmosphere in the evening to the one earlier in the day. It was much more somber and, a lot of people very tearful, and it appeared that London's heart was broken after all. Back in 1980, we only had 3 TV channels. There was no cable or satellite or anything like that. And 2 of the main channels, BBC and ITV, their schedules were completely scrapped, and they just showed non-stop Beatles stuff and John Lennon stuff, interviews, the 1975 Whistle Test interview, lots of interviews with people that knew him, people like George Martin and people that had worked with him, that sort of stuff. But lots of news footage as well, live footage from New York, where there were thousands of fans that were gathering outside the Dakota building. This was kind of the most like moving thing of everything that they were showing. The gates were covered in flowers, and the cameras panned across the fans, holding candles and singing John Lennon songs with tears streaming down their face. One thing that really struck me about looking at all those fans was the different age groups that had gathered there. There was kids, there was mums and dads, there was aging hippies and Hell's Angels and pensioners. But this, it was very clear that this was a man that had touched so many people's lives in so many different ways that he had absolutely no idea about, and it was just heartbreaking to watch. And I wanted to be there. It's stupid, really, but it kind of felt disloyal not to have been there. And in some sort of stupid, misguided way, I wanted him to know that he touched my life too. About 8 or 9 o'clock that evening, I needed to get out of the house, so I just went round the corner to see my mate who was a big Beatles fan. We hadn't spoken at all that day, so I kind of went round to see how he was doing. When I got to his house, they were playing Help on the TV, and so we watched that, and I distinctly remember that we didn't laugh once during it. It was all very depressing. In the next few days after the 8th of December, more and more people, there was film footage, more and more people gathering at the Dakota, loads of people from all over the world. And I remember that the week before, I'd just taken out a bank loan for £1,000 because I was going to buy a new car. And I just had this urge that I just really wanted to be in New York at this time, and I was considering, instead of buying that car, using that money to get a flight to New York and just to be there. I just felt like I wanted to be there. But I think that what happened was that Yoko announced that she wanted everyone to go home because the singing was upsetting her and Sean, and they just needed some time. So I didn't go, and I bought a Triumph Dolomite. The single, just like Starting Over, was slipping down the charts before John was killed. The week after his death, it went up to #1. And when it wasn't #1 anymore, Imagine was. And when Imagine wasn't #1 anymore, Woman was #1. John, up to this point, had never had a #1 solo record in the UK before he was shot, and now he had 3. He would have been chuffed. The flurry of Lennon chart activity in 1981 was brought to, I remember, an abrupt halt by a comedy record called Shut Up in Your Face by Joe Dolce. Normal service in the British charts had been resumed, and I still haven't forgiven the British record buying public for allowing that to happen. I'm going to fast forward now to December the 8th, 2000. On that day, I found myself standing beside the Imagine mosaic in the area of Central Park that's now called Strawberry Fields. 20 years after the event, I finally made that pilgrimage that I thought about making in 1980. And the park, it looked beautiful and peaceful, covered in snow, was populated by smattering of guitarists who were, accompanied by a choir of many people, singing Beatles and John Lennon songs. Crowd of people, delivered flowers and placed them on the mosaic, and others just sort of, just came and just stood and stared. And I have to say, it was the only place that I wanted to be at that particular time. And sort of having spent some time there, sort of chatting to some other Beatles fans, I was approached by a journalist and a cameraman from Fox News, who I think they must have picked up on my accent and asked if I wanted to do an interview. I said yeah. Feels quite thrilling. And the reporter wanted to know. He asked me, "What does John Lennon mean to you?" Which I kind of guess was his way of asking, what the hell is it that drives a man to fly 3,500 miles to stand in a park in the snow? But it's a question that's impossible to answer. For me, it's impossible for me to answer in, news bulletin sized sound bites. I'm sure, like we all do. I often think about John and wonder what he might be like in 2021. I bet he would have loved the internet. I can imagine him, ranting on Twitter. Would he have appeared at Live Aid? Would he have appeared at Live Aid with Paul? Would he still be preaching, peace to anyone that would listen? Would he still be the sort of the cantankerous old rocker with sort of razor sharp wit and wordsmith, have that wordsmith skill that's pretty much unrivaled in pop? Which of course is what he really was, rather than the sort of the canonised saint and part-time philosopher or politician that he sort of became in death. Would he still be as nutty as a fruitcake as an old man? I'd like to think so. But what do you think John would be like? Not necessarily in 2021, but just generally in older life. Do tell me down in the comments. But sort of, just summing up the whole thing. It's 41 years since John died, which gives you that incredible statistic that he's actually been dead longer than he was alive. That is quite something. But just sort of summing up the whole thing, I kind of totally understand that to form some sort of meaningful bond with a celebrity that you've never actually known, and to grieve for their loss, can be construed by some as being, the actions of an absolute maniac. But the sadness isn't. If I can try and sum it up, the sadness is not because we knew them, but it's more because of the absolute joy that they brought us when we needed them most. And I think that, I would give almost anything to hear the music that John would have made over the last 41 years. For people like me and you, people that never knew John personally, this is what we've been robbed of. I still miss him, and I think the world in general misses him, and I've absolutely no doubt that it would be a much better place with John Lennon still in it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.